So, I don't understand much about the fundamental science, but
the other person coming up as well.
she hopefully is
Oh,
visible.
there.
I'm
Okay.
here.
Hi, Erica.
Amazing. So we'll get involved in. Hi, Erica. I don't understand as much as I'd like about the fundamental science, but I am able to draw a 3-field Venn diagram, and I feel like, as we were talking about the kind of the understanding amongst academics, the understanding amongst people in general, and the understanding amongst corporates and governments as far as they're partnered and speaking to one another, that spot in the middle is sort of what we were getting at with the concept of this session. What language can they use to speak to one another in a way that is mutually useful? There's another very interesting wrinkle that you brought in just then in mentioning machine language and machine understanding. And I know just from my conversations with Erica in preparation for this, there was yet another kind of interpretation of this question of shared language for the purposes of quantum technologies, which is whether engineers are using the same language and able to understand the concepts that they should be able to collaborate over, or at least communicate over. So I wondered, Erica, if I could flip it over to you to say a little bit more about that interpretation. What does a shared language around quantum technologies mean to you? What's the significance of it? And then Ilyas, I'll probably ask you the same.
Yeah, so hello, I'm here in a boring office in Edinburgh. I wish I could have joined you. So about a shared language, well, first of all, I would like to say that we shouldn't forget that we're all of us already using quantum mechanics in our daily lives, because all of our understanding about whether materials are conductors or insulators and so on, all of our semiconductor electronics, lasers, MRI scanners, that's all due to our quantum mechanical understanding of how materials behave. So sometimes this is referred to as the first quantum revolution, and engineers have managed to understand and use that perfectly well, in a sense. What we now have that we're talking about is sometimes called the second quantum revolution, and it's different from, say, electronics or lasers or MRI scanners in that we are engineering and manipulating quantum systems on a much smaller and more precise scale. And this will, so if you study engineering at a university or technical school of some kind, you already learn some basic physics. And it will just, so those courses will now have to focus, at least for the future quantum engineers, they will have to focus more on also fundamental quantum concepts such as superposition and entanglement and so on, because we are wanting then to build devices that use these concepts. So we have to know how they work. Also the engineers have to know how they work. And the same goes for computer scientists who are then programming future quantum computers. So we need all of the software and hardware and everything, the whole stack for quantum computers. So we just need all of these different people from different branches of science and technology to understand the basics of quantum mechanics. And I would also include, say, not just natural scientists and engineers. I would also say that, especially when thinking about what are the applications and the consequences of quantum technology, we should include people like social scientists and so on in the discussion, just to try and figure out what are the consequences of different technologies. I mean, this was touched upon also in the previous session. I could spend the whole session here commenting on what was said in the previous session. There was a lot of interesting things. Yeah.
Yeah, I suspected that might be the case.
Yeah. Also,
which is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, with the sort of the broad appeal of quantum, we should. It was interesting you mentioned Calcutta and Burkina Faso and so on. I mean, I think we are making a terrible mistake because we are drawing on like a very small portion of humanity for who drives the innovation and everything. So that's a great pity there, but maybe a different discussion.
Well, that might well be something, a theme that we come back to, particularly later on when we look at the kind of economic or the capital implications of this this revolution. Ilias, can I put to you, roughly speaking, what I asked Erica, but with a little sort of addendum, which is in those 3 domains of people that James asked you about, how inconsistent do you think understanding of what quantum is?
So I'm still stuck at what Erica said. I was only paying half attention to what you just said, but I think yeah, Erica, it's a pleasure to be on the same stage as you. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, bloody hell. Okay, so language is my personal preoccupation, and I should not be sitting here because I find it very difficult to speak about these things, but I will attempt to be very, very concise. There are 2 aspects to this. I mean, I'm a great fan of Chomsky and Lambeck and the discovery over a period of time, particularly by my colleague, Bob Kuka, that language processing is quantum native, which means that meaning can be embedded in so-called Hilbert space. So there's one conversation around that and the impact that that will have on societies. And I know that's not directly what you're talking about. And then there's the point about understanding, which I think that's why you've got Erica here. And trying to be consistent so that greater numbers of people have some standard by which they can measure what's being said, right? And that is yet to evolve. And a great example is what happened in the semiconductor industry from about 1960s. And of course, in the internet, I mean, we never said, oh, let's Google something or what wiki is. So things do evolve naturally. Erica, the reason I'm still stuck at what you said, and I'm going to ignore this handsome young man for a second, is that I could not agree with you more. And we made a strategic decision about a year and a half ago to open source something called Ticket, T-K-E-T. Over, I think, approximately 2 million people now around the world, and this is one of the good things about the internet, through a GitHub resource, have access to exactly the same tools that somebody has in Edinburgh or at Imperial College or at Cambridge. And we were very determined in why we did that. We didn't do it because our investors wanted us to. In fact, they would have been horrified, which is why I'm not particularly keen on investors. But I think what really resonates with what you've said is that the likelihood is that the innovation that allows us to use technology for the benefit of humanity lies in its dispersal, and that requires language. And there's a brilliant organization, and I should have said it earlier, called the Topos Institute. Erica, you might find it interesting, T-O-P-O-S, Topos Institute. It was founded by 2 brilliant boys from MIT. And it is all about this. It is about how we democratize the language of technology so that we can then aid and abet its greater distribution. Now coming back to your question, which I think I remember, I think we're years away from having any consensus. I mean, at the moment, people still argue about whether I've got a better widget or yours, or mine's bigger than yours. I mean, we're still at that age. You know, this is all very competitive at the moment, and people will manipulate language. They want grants, they want money, they want so I think we are a little bit away from common language, if that's what you were asking.
Please do. I'll just remind again, like, stick your hand up, just catch my eye. We'd love to. No, please, yeah. If we can get a mic. So the one thing, if you wait for the microphone, that'd be amazing. Just because otherwise, people listening in won't hear.
So I have one question around the point about this democratization of access and about how this should be a power for good for all rather than for just a few. You were saying it before, the machines haven't kept pace with the technology and we're still waiting for that to happen. But isn't there going to be a tremendous first mover advantage for the person who gets there first, and they're more likely to consolidate more power than allow open access to everybody for what we're trying to build here?
Are you asking Erica?
I'm asking you generally consensus.
Well, maybe Erica first. Did you hear the question, Erica?
Yeah, it's a bit tricky because I don't see the newsroom at all. I'm staring at a screen of myself. So, so the question is about the getting the edge in technology. I mean, first of all, I think these open source initiatives that IBM and others are having, they're very, very important because they allow a large number of people, whoever is interested, to play around with prototype quantum computers, say, and try and figure out what are the applications we might want to use them for, because it's not clear that it will be a scientist who comes up with the killer applications. So it's very important to have broad access to these technologies. And the risk is, of course, that if we don't invest in this, that we're going to be left behind, because it is a very, very important technology that has the potential to be of great benefit. But also, say, if somebody else has ultra precise sensing and powerful computers and we don't have them, then that can be dangerous for us, right?
Can I ask, just to the point you've just made, how widespread, Elias, do you think the sort of incentive to do some of the things that you're saying you've done in open sourcing, making information available, how widespread do you think the incentive to do that is in the context of possible first mover advantage? It feels, on my sort of first impression, was that seems like a form of altruism, really, that is not so common in...
I am definitely not a macaskill effective altruist. I mean, I'm as far away from that as it's possible to be. Well, look, I think this is blessedly straightforward. I don't think there's any confusion about this. Let's leave aside how you define first mover advantage. Let's just leave that aside for a second. Typically, people equate that with lots of money, right? So let's just leave that aside for a second. You know, and I truly, truly, truly mean that. I don't, in 100 years' time, nobody's going to care whether there were 10 billionaires or 20 because of quantum. What will matter most is the way that it affects humanity as a whole. So if we focus on that for a second, I'll give you, and we really don't have to grapple with this. And then I think your question's a really good one, Luke. There are at least 500 organizations around the world that are involved in quantum computing, commercially, or should we say scientifically, verging on commercial. There are at least 300 organizations that we know of that are building a quantum computer, have built a quantum computer, or have got a key component. In fact, John, who should be sitting here now, is involved in a company that does that. The genie is out of the bottle. You could go online today and you can access a quantum computer. Now, the point I made earlier is that algorithmic advances and theoretical advances outpace, at the moment, access to machines. But that equilibrium is not decades in the future. It is certainly, if you believe what Google says, it's 7 years away, right? Now, they might be wrong. It might be 10 years away. It might be 3 years away. So I don't think that we are going to be short of quantum computers. Now, somebody might be sitting here with an axe to grind and says, oh, this is, my precious. And then, well, fine, I mean, okay, good, go and have a cup of tea. But the point is, there are another 300 people who've got another precious. What we don't know is the basis upon which, and this is a really good analogy for those of you historians of science, The Model T Ford came about when you harnessed a combustion engine to four wheels and you managed to reduce the friction and you got somebody to sit and steer. All those things that go into harnessing quantum computing are what's happening, and there are debates about whether you go down this route or that route. Your question, I think, is a really, really interesting one. As far as the, should we say, the great barrier to adoption is concerned, I think large organizations are short of people who understand quantum computing, and rightly organizations feel accountable, so they're not going to jump into something unless they can account for it to their board or whatever, their stakeholders. So I think that number of organizations is increasing, and open sourcing the essential tools creates that ecosystem. And I look back now over 3 or 4 years, and Erica mentioned IBM Qiskit, which is very good, but it's not a software development kit. Ticket gives everybody all the tools they need, and that then increases the ecosystem. And one of my favorite stories is this kid from Zimbabwe who 3 years ago had access to Ticket, and you know, and instead of emigrating to whatever America and earning gazillions, he's in Zimbabwe and he's doing what he's doing in Zimbabwe. And I think these little things matter. So my philosophy here is, I can't change the world. I want to, but I can't. So what can I do? And I'm just going to do that. And I think that's really what many, many other people are doing as well.
Erica, I wanted to put to you just that idea of a flourishing ecosystem of people who are acquiring the necessary skills to understand and therefore participate in the sort of quantum technology sector. What have you been seeing in your work at the university when it comes to that sort of skills acquisition, and who are the sort of people who are arriving to learn this language, learn this skill set, and take it forward?
So we do have people from a wide range of backgrounds becoming interested in quantum. Well, wide in the sense that it could be maths, it could be computer science or engineering. So when I recruit PhD students, I don't really care, do they actually, do they have a physics degree? I mean, I'm a professor of physics, but I write in my advert, I'm looking for anybody with a relevant background in something mathematical, because I'm a theorist, and then an interest in quantum. So I don't ask for people to know quantum mechanics to start with. So it's already an interdisciplinary field, and we are seeing. I mean, the people are starting to develop programming languages that would be suited to handling quantum computers. And I'm also on the scientific advisory board for quantum computing effort in Sweden. It's at the Chalmers University of Technology, funded by the Wallenberg Foundation. They are trying to build a superconducting quantum computer with the whole stack from hardware all the way to software and applications. So it's very, very interesting to see how you can get these different aspects to work together. So you do need people with a lot of different skills to work together.
Do you ever notice that? Do you ever notice that there's a regional or an international difference between some of the I don't know, the methodologies, the ways of describing things, the kind of culture around quantum when you observe it in the UK versus elsewhere?
I'm not sure. I mean, science is very international. I would say international. There's very little difference between whether you're in Sweden or in Germany or in the UK. I mean, the difference is more that the physicists are trying to understand what the computer scientists are saying, and vice versa, and we're getting somewhere on that.
What sort of methods are you using for that that translation?
So I mean, so I'm coming from a maths physics background, and we mentioned, for example, this XZ calculus, which is something that would be a priori unfamiliar to me. It's not the way I'm used to describing how quantum computers work. So it's a tool that I will have to learn and then see, is it useful? And well, people say it is. but it's not something that I was taught to do, say from the start. So it's something that I have to learn when I start working on these things. But I can see that you really need those sort of tools and formal methods and whatnot to verify that your quantum software does what it's supposed to be, because it's going to be in the end so complex that you can't sit and do it by hand. It's going to be impossible. Same as my laptop in front of me, it would be impossible to kind of check by hand that all of the components inside it do what they are supposed to do. It has to be automated somehow, and we have to have methods that work for doing that sort of thing for a quantum computer as well.
Is one of the things you mentioning the role that sort of open sourcing, the sharing of different toolkits can play. How common is it for large multinational corporations to do things like that? I mean, some names come to mind. We've mentioned already Google and I think IBM, etc. What's their approach typically to that type of?
Well, it's highly unusual. It's highly unusual. Yeah, people don't. They want to make money and make profits. It's highly unusual. Well, I think that maybe a different way of answering the question, I think. So I think quantum will be different. So this year, I think two things will happen in the next 12 to 15 months that will help us to unlock that question. First of all, I think we will see the first operating system. So the MS-DOS moment, for those of you who have an interest in these things, I think that'll happen sooner rather than later. So that is when from A to Z, you know, from the metal all the way up through to the compiler and all the way through to an application, you have a system, a process that is automated. That means that you have to tinker away with individual bits of a program. And for that, you need a machine to be able to do certain things. And in quantum, it needs to do something called mid-circuit measurement. I think that'll happen, and I think that will be a big turning point. When that happens, it converts theory. It's a bit like, you know, the 70s, all the mainframes, when you needed a PhD to be able to program one, to the point at the end of the 90s when there are millions of people who do computer science and can program without worrying about how a machine works, because it abstracts away the layers. And Erica's point about the stack as a whole is absolutely relevant there. So that's point number one. And I forgot my second point. Anyway, I can't remember now. And I think as far as, and as far as your question is concerned about open source, I think what will happen is I think an open source community using quantum technologies will outnumber the should we call it the system. And you only have to look at games and gaming. For those of you who are interested, I have two teenage boys, so I kind of have a anyway, so and that will take off. I don't mean gaming, I don't mean using it, but that equivalent. People who just like I keep saying, the genie's out the bottle. There is no way that you can regulate this anymore.
I wanted to maybe return to something that was a totally valid interpretation of what we set out when we asked this question about shared language, which was something that you alluded to about the language of the sort of the present capabilities of machines in language terms. I wrote a piece this week about a model developed by Tencent that was benchmarking to suggest roughly that, you know, it was interpreting language in Chinese more effectively than people typically do. And I feel like that type of story, it often to me it feels like snake oil, because it's not interpretation in the way that we typically mean it. It's not understanding in the way that we typically mean it. And you talked earlier about nuance, sarcasm. Could you explain a little bit more about that machine language to kind of nuanced human language transition that we might be looking at?
Yeah, so again, everything I'm saying is openly available for people to dig into and research. There's really no reason for us to have any guesswork in this. Okay, and I happen to be sitting here and I happen to know it, but there's no reason for everybody else in this room not to know in half an hour's time what I'm about to say. So about 2 weeks ago, the BBC just published a program, which is a multi-year program for them to look at their archive of language. I think it's 1 billion pieces of information. And who are they doing it with and what are they doing? They're using a quantum approach. It's with UCL and it's with my company called Quantinuum. Why? Why are they doing that? Well, of course, existing methodologies are absolutely not capable of doing that. There's no question about that. Let's not kid ourselves. Right? It doesn't work. Now, you can get beyond people who are trying to snake oil stuff. Okay, fine. They want to sell something for more than they bought it. Good luck to them. When it comes to the fundamentals of language, there are 3 or 4 papers out there written by Bob Coecke, Coecke. He discovered in a 2015 paper that was published, I can't remember now whether it was, I think it was maybe Physics Review. I can't remember now. It might even have been in Nature. And they said that just in the same way as we can do material discovery because it's quantum native, so language is quantum native. And the traditional methodology in computers is these things called vectors, tensor networks, where if a word is next to each other, and it happens often, red apple. So if I say red, the likelihood of the next word being apple is greater than red, I don't know, red ring, right? So these things, and you get millions and millions and millions of sentences, and computers, absorb them, and then they have these tensor networks, and they kind of guess what's going to happen next. And the likelihood is, the probability is that they're going to be right. Now, as we know, because we've been talking about this before, language doesn't work like that. Now, I don't know how language works. Nobody does, right? Are we born with it? Is human language unique, et cetera, et cetera? But what we do know is that when you start to embed meaning into words, it blows up in terms of the computational complexity that's required to handle it. And a quantum computer is uniquely suited to do that. There's been a number of papers published, there have been a number of experiments. Now, this young man here said about machines catching up. This is a perfect example of where, in order for this to become real, the likelihood is you're going to need a quantum computer with 10,000 logical qubits. Now, I appreciate that you might not know what that really means at the moment, but just to give you an example, the highest number of logical qubits created provably, any guesses? Whoa. Right, that's where we are today. Now, if in 1965, the equivalent of, how do you measure, who's a computer scientist here? How do you measure computer effectiveness? Speed, I guess, number of instruction sets that you can do. So if you look from 1965 to 1980, and then from 1980 to 2000 and whatever it is now, it's not going to take 40 years to get from 3 to 10,000. Google think that a universal fault-tolerant computer, so meaning 10,000 logical qubits or more, is 2029. That's their current forecast. Now, even if they're wrong by 5 years or 6 years, make it convenient, 2035, it's 12 years away. We'll all still be around. Our children will still be around, for sure. And the younger people in this room will be half my age. So you still are going to inherit this world. And that's what it means in terms of language. And I think you're absolutely right. The impact on, well, you didn't say this, but I think you meant it. The impact on society, like I said at the beginning, when Erica was talking, there's a mechanical issue about getting a commonality of language, but there's also thinking, bloody hell, what's that going to do to society when we are surrounded by machines that actually understand what you and I are talking about?
Yeah. Can I just ask 2 things? So I'm confused and excited. Confused, I don't understand why we're talking about a shared language problem around quantum generally, right? In that, when I look at AI, I think there's a shared language problem. People seem to be talking about completely different things, right? Yeah. When I hear people talk about quantum, I sort of feel like people explain what a qubit is, they explain what exponential computing power is. So can you just explain?
Yeah. This is a very local thing. This is like, in an episode of Neighbours, 2 of them don't like something, and like everybody watches Neighbours for one episode. Honestly, this has no... So what's happened here is there's a big debate. There are people who've spent a lifetime in science and academia and they get paid, what, 80,000 quid or 100,000 quid. And some of their colleagues are moving out and they're getting paid 5 million quid. And they're like, what's happening?
Yeah.
And then they listen, and these people are saying things, and the scientists in academia, by and large, I mean, I'm not saying like Erica should be the one talking about it. They're like, what the hell are you talking about? You can't say that. So that's one debate. Like there's this, you know, and then the second debate, and this is why it's very topical and why you need to do what you need to do with this thing, is that investors get involved and they say, I've just invested in this thing and it does this thing and it does this thing better. And somebody else says, oh, no, it doesn't. Oh, yes, it does. And there's no language, there's no method. And that's the current, no, hang on. And 4 or 5 SPACs, does anybody know what a SPAC is? It's a particularly vile invention. And so all these companies went public for not just quantum, but particularly in the case of quantum, 3 or 4 quantum companies at $1 billion, and now they're worth like tuppence halfpenny. And people are reading this and said, oh, I thought you said you had 50,000 qubits. Oh, no, I didn't quite say that. That language. So when I measure how, so not when this is advertised, there's some language that says it does this, this, and this, and we all understand it, and I can measure. That doesn't currently exist in quantum.
But I guess that's my question is it a common language problem, or is it a validation problem? Is it a bullshitting problem?
Well, of course, you know, ever since tulips, there's been a bullshit problem. But no, I don't know is the answer. I don't know. I kind of avoid that debate because I think it's, like I said, it's an episode of Neighbours, and in a week's time, nobody's going to remember. But I do think that sensible people, not including investors here, right? No, not because of their interest, their self-interest, right? I'm not being pejorative. They're not yet equipped. So when were they ever equipped? I look at FTX, right? And Thermagos or whatever. So that always is going to be a problem. But I think as far as the ability to validate is concerned, that fairway will narrow, and in a couple of years' time, we'll be okay.
So can I ask you one thing that I'm excited about? Forgive me, Luke. So we've had here, we're a relatively new newsroom. For 3 years or so, we've been knocking around, and we've had this ongoing story trying to investigate when will we be able to cross the species barrier in language, right? And my old colleague Gordon is here from the BBC. I'm thrilled to bits about kind of mining the BBC archive, but I would really love to know what animals are saying. And I want to know, is that, I mean, okay, you think that's Doolittle ridiculous, but is it feasible that a quantum computer is going to be able to do that?
Policy, I never answer. I answer every question I'm asked, except those I haven't got a clue about. I haven't got a clue. I have no idea. No idea. My opinion is worthless on that.
Erica, do you have an answer to that? The species barrier in language? She's gone.
Maybe not specifically that one, except an application.
I think there's another question over here, and then I've been told, just a moment, so I've been told that Fernando Gonzalez Zalba from Quantum Motion has joined in John's stead. Unfortunately, slightly late, but I did wonder, just Brian, we'll come to you in a moment, whether Fernando is there and able to hear.
Hello, good morning. I'm here.
Hi.
Yes, George.
Hi, Fernando.
Yes.
You're very welcome. I'm not sure how much of the sort of preceding conversation you've been able to hear, but I would be really interested to put to you a question about what Ilias has just said, which is that the arriving at consensus in the language, the terminology that's used to reflect the performance, the efficacy of quantum technologies will happen naturally. It's not something that needs to be manipulated, forced, or governed. Do you agree with that?
I agree. I think this is a key question, and it's not a question that is alien to us, because as we've seen with many technologies in the past, the figures of merit that have been used to describe them have evolved over time. No, maybe for those of you that think about video recording materials like beta or VHS, or later on CD-ROMs or DVDs or Blu-ray, we had competing technologies, and for a period of time, none of us knew which one was the best. No, we had these coexisting technologies, and until the users started to play with them, started to see the advantages of one over the other, we settled for some of those technologies. I think something similar will happen in the quantum technologies sector, especially in quantum computing, that as the technology evolves, because it's still an evolving technology, and the users start to play with them, they will start defining what are the figures of merits that are more important to them for particular applications. So I think this is the key, that the applications that the users are looking for are going to drive the benchmarks and the figures of merit that we are going to care about.
And forgive me, Fernando, if I'm wrong on this, but it does feel to me quite some way away until we have users of quantum technology that are familiar with the actual systems and some of the technicalities of what they're using in the same way that we have for games, as Ilias is just mentioning, that I'm not sure it's fair to say the average gamer is aware of the various engines that the game is built with, but they are aware of the platforms that they're using and some of the interface technology and things. That feels like quite a distance away with quantum, and therefore your point about, you know, the users will decide. Are we in a space now where the users can't yet decide because actually they're not close enough, aware enough of what the technology is doing, and there's a smaller group of people who are doing the deciding?
I think that's a very good question. There's certainly a group of people, probably small at this moment of time, that are playing with the quantum machines that are available, and this is what I think is key to make as many quantum machines available to external users. And they start to play with them. They are knowledgeable in terms of their algorithms that they want to run, and then they can benchmark what is the output of that they get with the different machines for their particular algorithm. So I think we need more people able to do this, more people able to program quantum computers, and more quantum computers accessible to compare the outcome of those results. No?
Yeah.
I think generally what I hear from colleagues, because I'm not a quantum programmer, I work on the hardware sector, but from what I hear from my colleagues that are working on software, in general, at least at the moment, quantum computers are not sufficiently powerful to arrive to sufficiently meaningful results to start making strong benchmarks against each other. But this is starting to begin. No? We are seeing even in scientific literature comparisons of different quantum machines in particular applications.
Yeah. Thanks. I'll give Ilias wanted to just respond for a moment, and then we'll come to you, sir. Just 1 second.
Yeah, sorry. I'm so happy that. Sorry, I forgot the young man's name. Fernando. Hello, Fernando. Say hello to John. I'm so glad he said what he said. I just wanted to level set as well on something that was said earlier. There is not a single solution available from a quantum computer today. There is not a single problem that is being solved computationally by a quantum computer. So the experimental use of quantum computers will lead to that, but today they are just very large refrigerators by and large. Now, the first product, however, the first product that does solve a problem has literally just made its rival, newly born. So this is a way in which you can use entanglement. This is what Erica was saying earlier about using the properties of quantum mechanics. A quantum computer natively entangles qubits, which can then be subject to a certain output that is measurable by something called the Bell test. And if you want 15 minutes of sheer joy, have a look at a YouTube about the Bell test. It is very, very, very interesting. But what does that do? It produces patternless entropy. Patternless entropy. Why does that matter? That matters because all the keys in cybersecurity that are currently or predominantly being used are algorithmic. Algorithmic means they are determinable, which means that they are hackable. So the holy grail of a key, a cybersecurity key, is to have something that is patternless. So for the first time, a quantum computer in its current form, it doesn't need to get any better, produces these keys that have a patternless seed, which means that they're not hackable. Okay, so this is something that matters in the real world, and this is now being made available and people are buying them. So this is the first time, and I think, Luke, this comes back to the issue of timelines that we were talking about in language. Soon, not now, but soon, over the course of, I would imagine, the next year, what took me 3 sentences to describe why that key is important will no longer need 3 sentences. There'll just be a word, and we will say, and it'll be the key that everybody knows cannot be hacked. So I think this will happen over the course.
The key that cannot be hacked isn't bad, though. It's a little bit long. So with the microphone, do you want to just tell us again who you are for people maybe who've joined since the last session?
Stuart Woods from Oxford Instruments. Hello, Fernando. Good to see you and good to hear you online. I guess for both Fernando and Elias, it's interesting to comment on the concept of time, right? I mean, I don't think at any point in humanity have we had 7.7 billion people able with a credit card to access a quantum computer or any type of, cutting edge technology. And I think even myself, having, worked at Cisco and lived and created the internet that you held in your phone, and, so I hold some of the sins even myself for what we've created. I think the rate of change that we're going to arrive at a common language will be mind-boggling to you and I think, Elias, because it will be at a point we're going to wake up one day and someone will have discovered it. And I wonder if you could sort of impress on the audience the rate of time that we're dealing with and how we're evolving.
Well, Fernando's an experimentalist, so he for sure will have something very solid to say on this. And I'm flattered that you should ask me. Look, I have a team of 300 people in Colorado who build our machine, and I've been running that. So just to give you some numbers, we've spent about $1 billion to get to where we are today. So as a firm, these things aren't cheap, but what has happened is that the timelines have compressed, and I think that the capacity to forecast entangled qubits that are logical and are error corrected and are faster than anything that is a physical qubit, so these logical qubits, performing an algorithm that is standard. I'm going to say Shor's, right? So this is the ability to factor numbers. It's just something that classical computers can't do. I think that the ability to simulate that on a quantum computer using that system I've just said is less than 15 months away. Had I been sitting here last year and you'd have asked me the same question, I think I would have said 2025, 26.
Yeah, I would agree. I think last year we would have said 5 years. And that fact that every couple months we're having that in half, we're cutting that in half is just staggering.
Yeah. I don't think we will, 2048, RSA 2048 won't be hacked using Shor's algorithm anytime soon. I think that is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years away. But let me be clear. At the moment, my laptop can simulate a classical system up to about 30 odd qubits. No quantum computer has yet even managed to reach that threshold. So a bit like my son was 12 and he was lifting weights and he was, here's my 2 kilograms, right? He hasn't even got to it. He's 17 now and he's a strapping young boy and he's a perfect V, blah, 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 blah. I love him. And so that cutoff, right, is happening. That cutoff when a classical computer can't do that is what we're now talking. I think that's 15 months away. In fact,
I think the other thing that
IBM think they've just announced. Sorry, they've just announced first quarter 2024, right? And they know what they're talking about.
I think the other thing, Elias, maybe you can comment on is the fact that if we take problems and we take them to a smaller level of granularity, we might have success in certain elements of fertilizer equations or so before we might get quantum supremacy or equality in subsections or niche elements of certain concepts of language faster than we might have thought before, which for us might have an added advantage.
Well, yeah, you've been planted by James, I think. So last night, BMW, literally last night, maybe this is why you need to do your thing, or you get some advertising in it. No, I'm for real. Last night, BMW and Airbus announced that they have started a joint program to solve the hydrogen. I'm not a battery person, but the hydrogen problem in, I think it's battery life and energy transmission in complex systems, using a quantum computer, not using classical. Now, why would they do that? They do that because they believe that by doing exactly what you've said, by narrowing it right down, they then will have that component which then solves the other problems. And I, of course, I've been ringside with both Airbus and did I say Boeing or Airbus? Airbus. I should have said Airbus if I said Boeing. So it's Airbus and BMW. And I think when people like that, and this is the point Erica was making and Fernando was making, within Airbus and within BMW, there are now not one or two people, there are 10 to 12 people who are capable of understanding quantum computing. And that gives you a consensus, that gives you expertise, that gives you depth, just in case one person makes a mistake, the other one catches him. And that's when you get these accelerations. I was staggered when I saw that.
I'm afraid we're going to wrap up in a moment. There was a final comment I wanted to get from Erica, just because she's put it online, which will mean nobody here in the room can read it. Erica, if you're still there, you're mentioning the opaqueness of quantum relative to other technologies, and that's a real it's an interesting point. Would you mind repeating it?
Yeah, so that's what I also wanted to say earlier on. That's quantum computers, the way they work, is not opaque in the same way as AI or machine learning can be opaque, that we really don't know why an algorithm that was interviewing people chose one person over another one, and we have all the kind of words with the bias that we have ourselves being replicated in these situations and so on. So the way a quantum algorithm works, it's perfectly transparent in a sense, only that the problem is that it's described by mathematics. And there are some counterintuitive features in quantum mechanics, which perhaps have been overemphasized, but it's understandable because that's what makes it so fascinating. So quantum mechanics and systems, single atoms, single particles of light, they behave in ways that we don't normally see big macroscopic systems behaving. But it is perfectly well described by mathematics. So it's perfectly transparent. And we just need engineers, computer scientists, people from all kinds of different disciplines to be familiar with that maths. It's not more difficult than programming a classical computer in principle. I mean, that is already very complicated, and quantum is no more difficult in a sense. It's just different.
Well, that's a brilliant note to end on. We're going to take a short break for 20 minutes, grab a coffee, have a chat. We'll be coming back at 20 past to talk about the key that cannot be hacked and other things. So I'll be joined elsewhere. And thank you so much to Ilias for sitting on this, and to Erica. Thank you.